Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, alongside of my good co-host Dylan. It's our first podcast of 2025, and what better way than to have on a regular guest of the show, Scott Powers of The Athletic. How's it going, Scott?
Good, guys. How you guys doing? Thanks for having me on.
Doing great. Yeah, well, as great as the Blackhawks are, which they aren't, but we're doing great.
But you know what? It's okay. Chicago sports is doing great right now. The Bears won last night, so. Cubs got Kyle Tucker. You know, it's all good. Chicago sports is so great right now. All right, not gonna waste any time. Not gonna. So the first question I got is, we have not done a podcast since I think December 1st, so we haven't even talked about this officially on the podcast, and that's the Blackhawks firing Luke Richardson and hiring Anders Sorensen as the interim head coach for the rest of the year. And we've got a month of sample size to go off of, and there are some small changes, but then like this team just isn't very good. And I think at the end of the day, I think Kyle Davidson at the front office needs to hire a coach with some more experience, because this is like almost 7 years now of head coaches that are kind of out of their depth, and not necessarily even their fault. Like, the teams that are constructed are not very good, but I also think like a veteran head coach, like even a guy like a Jay Woodcroft, I feel would be a way better fit with the Blackhawks. So I'm wondering, like, is like Sorensen at the top of their list? Like, do they really want to go with him going forward, or do you think they would prefer to get a more established head coach going towards the future?
I honestly don't. I don't think they know yet. Like, I think part of the plan was that they knew that Richardson wasn't the guy they wanted to go forward with. So they had these 60 games to figure out whether Sorensen was the guy. So I think they like Sorensen enough that they wanted to give him a look. They like him. They like him as a hockey mind. They like his coaching in Rockford. They like how he's developed players. But the question is whether he can do it at the NHL level and how it fits. And so I think, this was a perfect world for them, in that they were able to move on from Richardson, but also giving Sorensen this this sample size to see whether he coached at this level. So I don't even know if it's about the results necessarily. I think they want to see development. They want to see guys get better. They want to see the players who matter get better. The Bedards, the young guys, certainly call up Nazar and Doc now. I think those are important things. So I think the results will matter, and they'll want to see adjustments. Certainly they had some positive results going early. I don't, the team is what it is. So some of it may just be that the team kind of fell off. Some of it seems like Seth Jones coming back and, maybe not being up to speed, where he'd been playing a lot better under Richardson's system. So, and certainly the goaltending was, it was pretty strong for a while there. And now Mrazek had his injury, and even before that, he was tailing off, and Soderblom's had some good starts, but it's kind of been also sandwiched around some bad starts. So I think there are a lot of different factors. So whatever it is, 12, 13 games in, it's a mixed bag for Sorensen, and I think in 20, 30 games, and certainly by the end of the season, we'll have a better idea where guys are developing, whether they're improving, whether he's able to make adjustments. I think it's just way too early to know if he's the guy, and certainly if they find fault in what he's done, I think they do go out and hire an experienced coach. There's certainly other names, guys like David Carlisle, kind of hot names in the market right now. But I would be surprised if it's not Sorensen. I would think they go with someone who has an NHL track record and who's been through this before. But at this point, I wouldn't count out Sorensen. I think it's way too early.
100%. He's only had, like you said, about a dozen games worth to kind of play around with the roster. And to be fair, the roster isn't even fully healthy yet in terms of what is projected to be their 100% healthy roster. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which, like you were talking about earlier with Soderblom, he's taken more steps than he did last year in terms of not being the worst goalie in the NHL. But like you said, he has his good games and he has his bad games, but he has shown signs of development. I know Brossoit had a setback in his injury, so he's going to be out the next, foreseeable future. But if Brossoit is to be healthy enough to come back this year, I know Soderblom's waiver eligible now. So what exactly would be the Blackhawks' plan? Would it be to run 3 goalies potentially, kind of ease Brossoit in, or would it be to maybe trade Soderblom or something of that nature?
Yeah, I think again. I think this is one of those things that's way too early, in the fact that Brossoit's not even on the ice again. So, I think what I was told the other day, potentially there's a timetable for February at some point, maybe. But for him having not played the entire season, the fact he's not on the ice, there's so many steps toward the recovery. I imagine maybe a stint in Rockford, as a conditioning stint. I think there's so many different layers to get through before they get to the big dilemma. And, the fact that he probably don't have a ton of games, if he comes back after the Four Nations, maybe then you have a month and a half, and you probably can ride 3 goalies out. And, depending on where Mrazek's health is or how Brossoit needs how much rest. And, but I certainly think there's a bigger picture that probably they have to figure out in the off season is what to do with 3 goalies. Is Brossoit, like, can you depend on him? Like, I think that's still yet to be seen. They certainly like Mrazek. He's sort of hit the speed bump here. I would still think Soderblom's in the picture. Like, there's no reason like you want to move on from a goalie who's showing some improvements at 25 and starting to look a little bit like the goalie you probably imagined he'd be. So I think they resign Soderblom. It won't cost them a ton with his. He'll still be an RFA. So it's not ideal, and I guess there was always a chance when you go out and sign another goalie in the offseason, but they also wanted to protect themselves from having to go through what they did last year with Soderblom. So I think. I get it from their perspective, and this isn't the ideal probably future setup for them. But it's if Soderblom turns out and he can still be the guy of the future, then then you have to make a decision based on that. Like he's the priority over everyone else. But I think there are a lot of different layers to kind of get through before they get to that decision. But I'm sure somewhere in the back of their mind they know that they're not going to put Soderblom through waivers. They probably want to re-sign him. He's definitely shown enough where you want to at least carry it on. Even if he's not the number one guy, he seems he's young enough where you want to see this play out. So it'll be interesting over the next, probably over the next 6 months, I guess certainly the end of the season if Brossoit gets healthy to see how they manage it, but more so probably off season to see how they want to deal with it then and see which goalie sticks around or if there is any movability. Any trade ability with any of these guys, and that's sometimes hard. Or maybe they just put someone on waivers come training camp next year and see how everything falls there. So there's a lot of different ways this can play out still.
I gotcha. Yeah. And I wanted to piggyback off this question off something real quick because obviously Brossoit hasn't played a game for the Blackhawks yet. He was signed in the offseason and then, he had these injuries kind of almost piggyback off each other in a sense. Was this something that was known by management when they signed him, or was this something that kind of popped up in training camp and, they've had to kind of adjust accordingly as they've gone along with the season? Because he hasn't played. I don't think he played in the preseason either. So it's just
no. Yeah, no. It was something that happened in the offseason because I had talked to him.
Okay.
In July, I think, and he was feeling healthy, and I talked to him and his trainer at that point and did a story, and he was, he was finally feeling healthy, and it had been a good stretch for him after the injuries that he had with in Vegas, and certainly he played really well as a backup in Winnipeg last year, and he was all excited about the opportunity to kind of win a job, and at that point there was no indication that he had anything wrong with his knee, and so some time between that and when he got to camp there, something didn't go right. I don't know the specific, but at the point when I talked to him, he was healthy and fine, and they were all excited to have him. And then, and even at points, since his surgery before the season, like there were points where they thought he was going to come back and just had some setbacks, and certainly required another surgery to have a little bit more done to it. So it hasn't been what they expected. And and considering knowing that some of his injury issues over the last few years, I'm sure he's been devastated by this, and knowing that his opportunity with the Blackhawks could be at a cost at this too. You just don't know how this is going to play out. I mean, there's a chance that he never suits up for the Blackhawks. Who knows? We'll see whether that how Soderblom plays out. The season hasn't gone expected for a lot of these guys, so. It'll be curious, but from all indications, the Blackhawks, there wasn't anything wrong with him when they decided to sign him.
I figured as much. It's just an unfortunate situation because Brossoit, like you said, it seemed like he was finally hitting his stride in terms of health, and you just hate seeing setbacks like that.
Yeah,
so, sure. It's always unfortunate. Sorry, Pierce, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, it's all good. So my next question's with the Blackhawks. probably destined for another top 3 pick, potentially even first overall. And it's kind of a hot topic right now with the World Juniors happening. Who do you think the Blackhawks would pick if they were at first overall? Because to me, there doesn't seem to be any consensus. Maybe it could be James Higgins who just won a gold medal. I've heard Matthew Schaefer's name, even though he got injured with Canada, like as a potential possibility at first overall, but he's a defenseman with the Blackhawks want to go another defenseman. Or, there's Porter Martone, who's a big winger in the OHL. The Blackhawks, I think, do need more size up front. And, you could maybe go Michael Misa. So have you heard anything on like who the Blackhawks brass would prefer, who they really like right now? Or is it still kind of too early to call?
Yeah, I think it's too early, and just from talking to Corey Proman and some of the scouting guys, like it's sort of developing too. Usually after World Juniors, you have a better gauge of where it's at. And I'm sure Higgins will get a little bit of a bump from the U.S. winning and him producing, and the fact that Schaefer's out and Canada struggling as it did, that there wasn't probably the bump for some of those Canadian players. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's the fact. You still have 40 games left in the NHL season. Is they're probably destined for I would assume 32nd to 30th, somewhere in there. It's probably them and the Sharks, and the fact that the Predators and the Sabres are sort of in there still. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think the Blackhawks are starting to get on. I know Davidson was at the World Juniors, so he's starting to get out and see the guys more. And the fact that the Blackhawks have dropped off some as much as they have in recent weeks, I imagine he spends more time on the road in the coming months, looking at these guys in person. The Blackhawks scouting staff is meeting this week. Also, and then they'll have meetings, toward the end of the season again, and then at the draft, and sort of they sort of create their plan for the rest of the year to kind of, at this point they know where they're sort of going to pick, so they're certainly going to zero in on a lot of those players you mentioned. Schaefer's interesting, where I think there are a lot of people who really like him and think he's potentially the best player, regardless of position in this draft. Whether the Blackhawks would draft another defenseman, I think we'd all be surprised by that. But if they have first and he's the best player, maybe they trade off of it, and maybe there's some asset, so you can move some assets around. I'm not sure. I think that Schaefer's injury certainly complicates where he can go, but certainly he was playing really well. Higgins hasn't probably performed as people hoped he would in college, where he's been pretty good at the World Junior level, and in college he's been fine, but he's not been Celebrini like. Those other guys, Misa and Martone, certainly having pretty good years in the OHL, and I think there are a lot of upside to those guys too. So yeah, I don't know. I personally don't know enough about them to say this is the guy. It was probably February, March last year where I started to get at least a sniff that it was going to be a little bit more of the Demidov Levshunov debate, and certainly the lottery has to go in your favor still. So if they finish 32nd, they're guaranteed a top 3 pick, and that's probably ideal for them at this point. And then you have you'll get someone you like. It doesn't seem like certainly doesn't seem like it's a Celebrini Bedard situation where there's a definitive number one. So I think that's a challenging point. But the Blackhawks aren't going to turn down a top 5 pick and getting likely another forward to add to the boatload of prospects they have coming on. So it'll be interesting, and certainly how this season's play out, it'll probably determine this a little bit. And I'm not sure the World Juniors is probably as much of a marker as there has been in recent seasons. But Higgins seems to be the guy, whether he fits the Blackhawks. There are going to be some of those conversations too, where he's a really nice player. Is he too small for what already they have? So I think there are a lot of different conversations the Blackhawks will have. But the fact that they're meeting this week as a staff, there might be a better sense in the coming months of what they want to do, and certainly who sort of emerges from the prospect pool to be, I guess, the guys who will be in the top 5.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with the Blackhawks is, you got Connor Bedard, and you even look at the prospect pool, you see how someone like Nick Lardis is performing in the OHL, or even Roman Kantsarov in KHL, who's not even just like one of the best rookies. Like, it seems like the past month or so, he's been one of the best players in the KHL. There's certainly promise there. I mean, the defense it's so good. Like, whether you think the Blackhawks should have taken Demidov over Levshunov or whatever, that defense I think is going to be very good in a few years, and we're already starting to see pieces of it form together with Alex Vlasic, but I think they don't have like another player at Connor Bedard's level. And like I look at the Sharks, and everyone's like so hyped about the Sharks, and I get it; they're fun to watch. With Macklin Celebrini, I think he should win the Calder. And then you have other players like Will Smith and William Eklund, and I just don't think right at this moment the Blackhawks don't have that. Like Frank Nazar could be that. I think he's showing some promise, but I think they need I think he's a tier below that. I think they need another player that's closer to Connor Bedard's level. And I think just looking at the players, regardless of who they take at the top, I think they're going to get a player that fits that bill.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of promise with Nazar right now. I know Will Smith's got a lot of hype, but it's not like he's putting up crazy numbers either. I think Will Smith's a really nice player. But I think Nazar is sort of that second line center. They'll eventually need to get a running mate for Bedard, and I don't know if it's within the pipeline yet. And it's potentially someone they go out and get later on, because even if you're talking about a top 3, top 5 pick this year, you're looking at someone who probably isn't jumping in the NHL and who probably needs a few years. These aren't the immediate impacts, and it's sort of where the Bedard, as much as drafting Bedard was such a positive for Blackhawks, it also kind of skewed how people think about prospects and how quickly they can get to the system. And even seeing Doc, sort of struggle in his first few games and, being hemmed in, he may need to go back to Rockford and come back again, and so many things to work on. And Nazar, I think Nazar's looked really good. I think the scoring chances have been there. Needs a little puck luck, but there's an adjustment period for most players, and you have Lardis coming in next year, and you have Oliver Moore likely signing, and certainly a whole Misiak, Ryan Green, Dominic James, and you go down the line of guys who are probably going to come into the system next year, and probably a lot of them need time in Rockford and maybe a couple of years. And I think you look like someone like Alex Vlasic, who's basically 5 years out from being drafted when he when he finally developed and looked like an NHL player. So I think there's a lot of hope for Lardis, who the question is whether he can do it at the NHL level, and probably needs to strengthen up. And Kanserov, you still got another year away from him signing. A guy like that, at least he probably steps in from the KHL being ready. Oliver Moore's had a pretty good year, looked good at World Juniors, but there's some areas for him, and you got Bovair and Vanacker and all the guys down the line. But I think it's so long until some of these guys probably hit. You're probably still talking 2-3 years where the rebuild finally maybe takes shape. So I do wonder if this offseason, if someone like Rantanen or Marner or someone becomes available, at least the Blackhawks, look down that road, because it's they were hoping that Teravainen would be a little bit like Toffoli was with has been with the Sharks, and it hasn't worked out perfectly. As that we're choosing Teravainen and haven't been bad. They certainly have upgraded the talent, but it's neither have been like a perfect match for Bedard. So I do think long term that's one of their biggest things they need to figure out puzzle wise is just finding that running mate for Bedard, and whether that's within the system or it's somewhere they have to go pursue at some point. So I think it's interesting. I think over the next few years you'll have a better sense of how this team's coming together, and you'll see more of these younger players. And I saw Rockford play yesterday, and guys like Slaggert and Savoie, I would will be on the roster in the next few years. And certainly the fact that we see Doc and Nazar now, and a year from now there's all those other guys coming into the system and signing. So it should be interesting. And then at some point they need to probably go outside. It's so hard to build from within and do this all. So I think Davidson will be very careful and wise in how he spends that money, and when he does it, he doesn't want to do it too soon. He doesn't want Bedard at 20 and his running mate being 30 years old. So I think but I do think that at some point the Blackhawks need to either figure out who within the system or who outside of it is to be Bedard's kind of running mate and all this whole thing.
100%. And that really stems from the point of, like you said, you need to align the timelines, right? That's why, like, everyone brings up the scenario of if a Rantanen or a Marner becomes available, you have to at least entertain the offer, because you're going to have the money that they're looking for. And on top of that, it's pretty, the only thing you can't pitch them is that they're going to win a Stanley Cup year one, but you're going to be playing with one of the dynamic young players in the league, and you're probably going to get glued to his wing in that case, with playing 20 plus minutes a night. It just depends on what those players are looking for at the end of the day. But I know at least with Marner, it's going to be financial, and they could financially meet that for sure. But he might just take less and go win a cup. Like, we don't know. But
I would say that I think if those guys become UFAs, that they're likely it's going to be money driven, right? Like you're inside two organizations that are have cup likelihoods in the future. So I think the fact that those teams can give those guys 8 years where they can only take 7 at UFA. So I think it'll be largely driven by money and the fact that they can probably go outside somewhere else and get more money. And so the Blackhawks have to be prepared for that too, where you may be paying a little bit over market value. The fact that cap's going to go up could benefit the Blackhawks in the future with guys like that. But I'm not convinced either become UFAs, but if for some reason it happens that way, I think Davidson certainly at least entertains that, like you said.
And you mentioned different avenues of going to get those players, and that kind of brings me to my next question, because obviously the rumor mill is always hot this time of year. You hear names in the trade bait board.
Patterson and Miller,
yeah, we got all that going on in Vancouver. But when it comes to the Blackhawks, I look at 2 players specifically, in Seth Jones and Connor Murphy, and just the writing's on the wall that their timeline doesn't align with the Blackhawks timeline. And like you mentioned earlier, Seth Jones hasn't really adjusted since the coaching change. Do you potentially foresee a world where Kyle Davidson starts exploring the opportunity to potentially trade Seth Jones for a forward to help with Bedard, or, finally give Connor Murphy that chance to go compete for a contender? Obviously, I don't know what either of these players are looking for in terms of long-term and moving their families and whatnot. But, do you think that's something that Davidson's potentially entertaining? Maybe not even this season, but in the off season.
Yeah, Murphy maybe. I think Murphy's is next year, the last year of his deal. Maybe Murphy. I guess. I mean, he's played decent this year. I think keeping around isn't a bad thing if he's helping. They certainly have a lot of young defensemen still. I don't think Murphy hurts. Jones, I think the reality is that you probably have nothing to like. He controls everything. He has a no movement clause. Does he want to go pursue something else? The moment he says that, I'm sure Davidson would certainly be happy to go look. I don't know what's out there. I mean, who's taking on Seth Jones in the contract right now? Like, you're still, even with the cap going up, it's still a sizable contract. And do the Blackhawks have to eat some of it? I don't know. Like, he's not in position to be bought out. I think the Blackhawks need to figure out probably more likely how to make it work with him. Is it a reduced role? Is it I don't know if he's just not feeling right now or what it is. Since he's come back, he hasn't been the same. Maybe it's the system. Maybe it's just him adjusting still. I don't know. I think in a perfect world the Blackhawks would love to trade Seth Jones. I just there's probably not much reality to it. Like, there probably aren't any takers at his cap hit with as many years he has left, and he does control everything. I'm sure he's he's getting settled in Chicago. He likes his security. Certainly would probably love to win more, but he's playing like he's given number one defenseman minutes, and he's given that role. I don't get the I'm sure he's dissatisfied like all the guys are about losing, but I don't think that he's unhappy here. And then there's probably, he probably has to face his reality too. Like, he knows his situation. He knows how he's playing. If he says, go trade me, and no one wants him, how does that look? So I think maybe more of a conversation in the off season or in the coming seasons for him and his agent to kind of discuss. But I don't believe anything's imminent and nothing's really been discussed. At least that way.
Makes sense. I mean, I also got to remember at the end of the day, he had all the control of where he was going in a trade. Like, Chicago was definitely an avenue he wanted to go down the line. Granted, it hasn't worked the way he probably thought it was going to work when he got here, with the management shift and the coaching shifts and all that. And he hasn't been dealt any good cards. Let's just put it that way. Like, I think having a revolving door as his defensive partner doesn't help either. Every time they've put a consistent partner with him, he has done well, whether it was Vlasic or McCabe or Calvin DeHaan or whoever they've chosen to stick with Jones. It usually helps to have that consistency. And the same goes for any player on the team. We've seen it with Bedard time and time again. When you change his line mates every game, you can't get any sort of chemistry formed. So I think, like you said, it probably comes down to get the season with Sorensen. If he can figure it out, then yeah. If not, those are some conversations you have down the line. But I was just curious because obviously, with Murphy, I know he always talks about wanting to play playoff hockey, and he's getting on the wrong side of 30 now, and his contract is at a position where it could be movable, and he's a right-handed defenseman that is stay at home. Like, that's always going to have value somewhere. And you
got Lev Shunov and Renzel on the way.
Yeah, that's also what.
It might be something where he might be more of a deadline move next year. Like, it's I don't know if a team builds around Murphy or not, or if he's someone available at the deadline, they move him, and maybe he has more. At the deadline, maybe there's a little bit more willingness to trade something for him if he's playing well. So yeah, I also don't think the Blackhawks like Rinzel comes in next year, and we'll see if Levchinov comes up or Korchinski, but I think they still want some experienced defenseman, and certainly Murphy's cap hit isn't hurting them, and I do think they'll do right by Murphy in the end, but he's pretty settled. He just had a child, and I believe his wife's from the Chicago area, so I don't know if they how much of an urgency he's in. I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks around for a little bit, but again, there's probably a conversation that probably happens more in the off season or potentially even next trade deadline. So but two things to watch I certainly in the future for the team.
Of course.
Do you think, kind of on the topic of trade deadline, trading older guys, who do you think is going to be their hottest asset? Like, you would think Taylor Hall, just because he's got the name value, but I almost feel like since Ryan Donato's a free agency, he would have, I think he could get more than what Taylor Hall could, because teams love like flexibility and versatility come the playoffs, and Ryan Donato just seems like a guy who can play up and down your lineup any position. So who are some guys that you think they could trade away? Because to me, Donato, Hall, and I would even put Alec Martinez in there just because, again, veteran defenseman who's won 3 Stanley Cups.
Yeah, no, I think Hall is probably the main piece still. His trade value has probably decreased over the last month or so. Like he was scoring at a higher rate. Since his hat trick, it's kind of fallen off a bit. He probably gets you a third, maybe a second in the right environment. Donato, I was just talking to Scout about this today, and he thought maybe a third or fourth. I think Alec Martinez, I don't think he wants to be traded, and I think the Blackhawks have talked to him about that. Like I think he just had a child and stuff, so I'm not sure how. I think Alec Martinez's priorities might be elsewhere at this point, and so I don't sense that. Maybe Pat Maroon maybe draws interest, somewhere deep in the lineup, but it probably doesn't bring
Craig Smith.
Yeah, maybe a Craig Smith. There's a lot of these type of guys around the league too, right? So maybe Maroon, the fact that he's won cups, maybe you add that. But yeah, either way, it's probably not what people are going to want to hear. It's not going to probably gain much unless the Blackhawks are able to become like a third party or take on a contract or something. Maybe sweeten up, sweeten the draft pick. But I think for the most part, it's probably going to low key deadline, and they need to move some guys out, especially if they want to bring in Oliver Moore, or Rinzel, or Ryan Green probably end of the season, or call up some guys. Having those roster spots would help with some roster flexibility. You're not having to sit veterans. So I think I think they'll move a couple of guys. Donato and Hall would probably be the top of the list, and maybe someone like Smith and Maroon does draw something. But those are probably a little bit underwhelming, and they're probably hoping. Hall was probably the main one. Like if he goes off, maybe the Blackhawks are hoping for for something better. But it seems like he's been good, but not great certainly, and probably not more than maybe a depth scorer for a contending team. And Donato certainly I think Donato's played really well this year. I don't know what the the opinion around the league is, but someone they probably or can play in some different roles for you, like you said. So I think both those guys draw some sort of draft picks back, and then maybe it's someone else. But yeah, maybe again the wild card will be as if the Blackhawks can get involved in trade and maybe use some of the cap space they have there too.
Yeah, 100%. And it kind of brings me to my next question. Is we're kind of the way you described the deadline was almost like freeing up roster spots is what the trades would be facilitated for, in a sense, because we have so many young prospects coming through the system. And I guess that brings me to my point of like, how long of a leash do some of these prospects have, do you think? Because obviously Sorensen would have been their coach this year. So since he's up in the big leagues, you want them to kind of keep that consistency. But like, for a guy like a Doc or a Nazar, we saw Korchinski had 9 games. Kaiser got a little stint and had to go back down. I'm curious as to how long Nolan Allen's going to stick with the roster, because I think he's played better than expected at the big leagues. But how long of a leash do you think these prospects have, and when they get their look with the big club?
Yeah, I think there's some guys in different categories. Like Nazar, they brought up where they wanted to make sure that he was, like they saw enough in his game at that level to keep him up here. They don't want him bouncing back and forth, and I think he has held his own. Doc was, like it was probably this is his first look, and we'll see how it goes. And if they send him back down, I don't sense that he's like one of those guys that they're, he's probably someone they would love for him to pan out and be part of the rebuild, but he's not someone like they're banking on, like a Bedard or a Nazar or Kurchinski or Levchinov. So I think he's in a different category. And the defenseman, certainly Nolan Allen's played better than anyone's expected. And, the fact that they're not healthy yet. And but they probably do have some decisions ahead of, if El Martinez is coming back and, with Crevier's played pretty well as of late. So who sits, who goes back to Rockford. Certainly TJ Brody hasn't been great. I think maybe, he can potentially be the guy who sits, but you don't want young guys sitting too much. You probably send another guy back to Rockford. So who's that? Yeah, we'll see. Certainly I think Kaiser is played better again too. So I imagine he stays up. So maybe it's between Allen and Crevier and see who they kind of are confident with at that point. So, I think I'll just kind of vary on the players. And, I think Doc, they don't want to just give him a game or two and then send them down. Probably I would assume that he gets a few more games and they kind of gauge it from there. And, there aren't a lot of guys probably knocking on the door from Rockford right now, guys that they like. And, guys like Slaggert and Savoie, who I think eventually will be up here, but whether this year or not, probably the numbers kind of, dictated, or even a Cole Gutman, who I think's played pretty well in Rockford, and seeing the Ice Hawks play yesterday, I thought he would look pretty good again. And I assume Levchinov and Kurchinski's probably spend most of the season in Rockford from here on out, and maybe someone gets rewarded for a game at the toward the end of the season. But again, numbers will dictate that. So, I think it all varies. But I think the Nazar was the key one for them. They wanted him to come up at the point where they were comfortable with his game, and a point where they didn't have to send him right back down again. And outside of the actual production, I think he's had the scoring chances, and overall his games look pretty good. So I think he's here to stay. And then I guess we'll just see how the competition pans out, and injuries and all that type of stuff will impact the rest of the decisions.
Can't forget the Joey Anderson hat trick as well.
I guess for him, I'm sure that sucks going down there, and at least the one positive is he gets to play more ice time, and for him to score a hat trick, I like Joey, so good for him.
I do too. I think he's a good depth. He's a good guy to have as an extra forward for sure.
No, for sure.
In case someone gets hurt.
I was like a fan of CU going down, scoring 2 goals, and then he got hurt the next game.
Yeah, poor guy. Oh man.
My last question, Scott, here, since we're already past the initial time. We do appreciate you coming on. Like, what are the Blackhawks' plans with Kurashev and Reichel now? Because it just seems like they've completely fallen out of favor with the new coach Sorensen. Like, is there a trade to maybe be I don't even know what you would get for either of them at this point. And kind of to like put another question into here, like looking at Kyle Davidson's trade history, obviously he spent the first 2 trade deadlines here just ripping everything down to the studs. And he's made trades like taking on bad contracts to get draft picks, example like last off season Ilya Mikheyev, but it doesn't seem like he's taken any chances to say trade like a second or a third for an underperforming prospect. Again, like don't want to compare everything to San Jose, but like them trading some prospects for a Yaroslav Askarov or whatever. So I guess it's kind of like a lot mixed into one. But do you think they could maybe trade, like what could they get for Reichel Kurashev? And do you think like within the next few months, come the deadline or maybe off season, will they start making some trading some of their draft picks or even like some of their young players, like especially defensemen, to maybe take some chances on young forwards? Like we've said, Trevor Zegras and Morgan Frost, and we're going to continue to kind of bang that drum because I think they need more of those kind of players.
I think starting off with it, I guess trading for those type of players. I think they have so many picks coming in that they want to see it. Like they're confident in their ability and the draft players, and we certainly don't have enough knowledge yet. I'm sure we'll, once there'll be some guys who hit, some guys who don't, but the fact that they have such an abundance of them that they, their plan and the fact that they have this huge leash from Danny Wirtz and the organization to see how this plan, this whole rebuild pans out, that they're going to give it time. Like they want to see how Moore pans out, and Vanaker and Bovair and Misiak and Green, and we're starting to see some more of these players, enter the organization, and more of these first rounders coming. So I think they don't want to give up assets until until they have a better sense of whether these guys are going to pan out. And certainly if there was more pressure on them to win, I think this would have been dealt with differently, where they would have started moving assets and maybe taking some of those chances. And, we saw a little bit early on with Radish and Tkachuk a little bit, taking guys who maybe were potential players and it didn't work out in that case. And he's done less of that. And, now I think even now, like, they're trying to decide on who to sign. Like you got, a guy like Aiden Thompson, who's had a really good year at Denver. But do you sign him to an NHL contract, or do you only have give him an American League deal, because you don't know? And there's more of those guys where they're going to have to make decisions on, because there's so many guys coming in. I mean, the amount of guys, in the next few years, where you even got Spellacy and all the guys in the CHL have to sign within a few years, and the guys usually in college. Bovair probably doesn't want to stay more in college than 2 years. So you get all these quick timelines, and you need to make space for them, mostly in Rockford. So I think that window to do a lot of that stuff probably was earlier on, and he probably missed it. And they certainly haven't gone the European route as much as Stan Bowman did, and it's something that they haven't looked at as much. So I know that's what fans want. It hasn't been what he's been willing to do, and I doubt he's likely to do it now, because they have more prospects coming in, and they're just going to give those spots to their own players. So, as for Reichel and Kurashev, I'm with Kurashev. I don't know if there's any trade value. Like they're not going to re-sign him at his price point, where he's got a qualifying offer of $3 million.
Doesn't he have arbitration rates too, I think?
Yeah, the arbitration probably would. I mean, you got to qualify him. Even at this point, Kurashev would just take a qualifying offer. Like, he's not going to get $3 million. So if the Blackhawks wanted to keep him, they'd have to qualify him. And Kurashev would take that, and the Blackhawks won't even offer the qualifying. So I imagine he walks. And for a team right now, maybe you trade for him if you have the cap space and you have it play out. But even then, you're going to have to go through the same situation where you'd have to qualify him or something and try to re-sign him. So I don't think, I doubt that he's going to be moved, or if he goes to a team, like, it's for a trial where they probably don't want to re-sign him at $3 million. So Kurashev's in a tough spot where he's probably just going to walk as a UFA. Reichel, I don't know. I think he'll get another look again this season. Like, the team is, it's obviously struggling. It's hard to say that he's been the problem, and you give him a couple of games to sit. And I think as a whole, the Blackhawks have probably moved on from Reichel, thinking that he's a piece of the future. But you have him signed cheap. He's not hurting you. There's probably no, at this point, another team's not going to come in and give you something major for him. Like, there are probably a lot of teams around the league would love to give Lucas Reichel a look and see if it fits, but it'd be more of a, kind of a trial and error thing for them, where they're not going to bank on Reichel. So I don't think the Blackhawks have anything to lose, at least to see how it plays out the rest of the season. And then, I wouldn't be shocked if Reichel's back here next year. He certainly has to probably prove more, more to get any future contracts or to be part of this rebuild in the future. But I do think, moving on from Reichel at this point probably doesn't make a ton of sense. He's still so young, and maybe he figures it out. And, he has had his moments where he's looked pretty good. And so I think he gets back in the lineup, but Kurashev, there's probably a lot more doubt around him, just because based on his contract and what you'd have to cost to just re-sign him. So I think Kurashev's a UFA, and Reichel probably sticks around. But maybe if there's some sort of package or something, I could see Reichel pushing for a change of scenery, or the Blackhawks giving it to him if something was the right in return. But where the Hawks are in the rebuild too, I don't think there's much risk for them. It probably makes more sense to keep him around and see if it all, for some, somehow some guys figure it out, and maybe he's still that guy. He certainly has a lot of the athletic attributes you like in a player, just hasn't been able to put that together.
100%.
Do you have any other questions to ask?
No, I think you covered all of our grounds here. We really do appreciate you coming on, Scott, and taking the time out of your busy schedule. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Blackhawks fans, we want instant gratification. Like, you want to see them make the big move and like make all these big moves, but it's a long process. Like, there's so much promise in their prospect pool right now. Like, it genuinely makes me happy when I like log on to Twitter and see like, oh, Roman Kanserov scored a goal, or like Sam Rinzel has scored another goal in college, or even like Sasha Bover. Like, I think, and like Nick Lardis's like goal per game almost. Like, there's so much promise. It's just on the team, not so much right now. And when you got Connor Bedard and he doesn't really have like anyone kind of close to a skill level, it's frustrating.
No. Yeah,
That's
it's
how it is right now.
To get there, like at some point, I think it turns the corner, and the team's good, but there's no guarantee that either. But it is tough because they were allowed such a long time to rebuild, and they're going to see it through. And if it works out, it's brilliant. If not, people are going to be really angry. So it'll be interesting over the next 2 or 3 years to see how this turns. So but yeah, plenty of prospects to talk about from now.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for coming on. Thanks for giving your time to us. Talk about Blackhawks.
Take care.